We are now live streaming on YouTube, and I will now let folks in the building. Good evening, everyone. If you're just signing on YouTube, it takes a couple of minutes to get everybody on. But if you're looking for the Renters Alliance Democratic Gubernatorial Primary Forum with candidate John Barron, you found the right place. So welcome. We started in just a few minutes. Going to let people come on in. You're looking for the Candidates Forum, Democratic Gubernatorial Primary Candidates Forum with candidate John Barron. You found the right place. Just letting everybody in. Take a few minutes. Just getting started. It started in a few minutes, just letting people in the door. Welcome, everybody. One more minute and we'll get started. Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the Renters Alliance Democratic Gubernatorial Primary Forum 2. We are welcoming with us tonight candidate John Barron. My name is Matt Losak. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. With me is the vice chair of our board, Chris Perry, and board member Sophia Bouchen. They can introduce themselves in more detail when it's their turn to ask questions. And of course, we have with us candidate John Barron. Candidate Mike Rosenbaum, unfortunately, withdrew from this evening's forum late this afternoon for, quote, personal reasons. So we are pleased then to give our time to Mr. Barron to express his views after a series of questions that we will ask him, and then we will ask questions that come from those of you who are in attendance. We will ask Mr. Barron when we begin to give us a broader view of who he is, where he comes from, and why he's running for governor. I suppose we'll begin there. So, Mr. Barron, thank you very much for coming. We are so pleased to have you, as we have been with all of the candidates for the Democratic gubernatorial primary. Please introduce yourself. Tell us where you come from, your background, and why are you running for governor of Maryland?
Oh, of Maryland. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a longtime resident of Maryland. I've lived here in Montgomery County for 27 years, raised our kids here. I spent most of my childhood here. My two boys went to the same public schools that I went to. I love this area. I love the state. I'm running for governor because Maryland could do so much better in a number of different areas, in education, jobs, healthcare, housing. We have not been solving, as I'll described during this call, we haven't made much progress in solving many long-term social problems. Our poverty rate today in Maryland is 9%. You know, you want to take a wild guess, Matt, what it was in 1995?
Well, I'm sure you'll tell us.
It was 9%. Because for low and moderate income Marylanders, they've seen flat wages for several decades while income inequality has grown. In education, more than a quarter of middle school students in our state can't read at a basic level. More than a third can't do basic math. Those numbers are no different than they were 20 years ago. All of these problems are that much worse. Poverty, wages, education for Marylanders of color. It seems like everyone's had a new plan to solve these long-term social problems, but here we are, it's decades now. We're still mired in the same problems. Clearly, we need to do something very different. That's what I'm offering. So I have been on a mission in my career to find effective new ways to solve our country's toughest challenges. I served, as brief background, I served in the Clinton administration. I headed $1 billion technology program. I won awards for reinventing government. Later, I founded a nonprofit that worked with the Bush and Obama administrations to get a number of major reforms in social spending programs enacted into law that produced big gains in education, earnings, healthcare, and other areas. I have been an appointee. Well, most recently, I headed the largest philanthropic initiative in the nation that identifies and expands proven effective social programs, including several homelessness prevention and reduction programs that I'm going to describe. I've been an appointee of Democratic and Republican presidents and twice confirmed by the Senate. Tonight, I'm going to talk about, and I want to talk with you and get your input and reactions and all of it on my ideas on and proposals on affordable housing. So I'd love to talk with you about that. My approach is one thing that will be a theme of my comments tonight, and the proposals that I'm going to outline is that I seek to, as governor, I would expand programs and policies that don't just sound like they're good ideas, but that have been tested in the real world and shown to make a big difference in people's lives.
So if I might ask you, Mr. Barron, sure. Because you gave yourself a little bit of short shrift on some of your fundamental credentials. We know the big credentials, but have you been to school? Did you graduate high school? What kind of credentials do you have?
Yes. So I graduated from Bannockburn Elementary School in Bethesda, Maryland in 1973. I graduated from, I do have a high school diploma. Family moved to Texas in high school. I graduated from Dickinson High School, went to Rice University, got a bachelor's degree in Houston, Yale Law School, and I got a law degree there, Princeton in public policy, a master's degree. I worked for Congress for 5 years, and then in the Clinton administration, that's where I was a Clinton appointee in heading that technology program that I described.
And I believe your bachelor's was cum laude, and you went to Princeton as well?
I went, to Princeton. I got a master's degree in public affairs.
Public affairs. Okay. Seems like you are pretty good at school. Very good. With that, let me just remind our participants that if you have any questions, we will get to yours. Please put them in the chat, and we will ask those questions after our board asks Mr. Barron our questions. Our first question will be from our board member, Sophia Bouchen, who would please introduce yourself again. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you're with the Renters Alliance, and then please ask your first question to Mr. Barron.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Barron. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Sophia Bouchen. I'm also a renter. I'm a board member for Montgomery County Renter Alliance. The reason I've joined Renter Alliance is because I'm a renter myself, and also I wanted to voice renters' issues. And I also serve as the vice chair for Silver Spring Citizen Advisory Board. I'm also a proud member of Ethiopian community, and sometimes I take up on the role of being liaison between the Ethiopian community and the Montgomery County. My question for you tonight, and also we have asked all of the candidates to tell us about their personal housing experience. So my question would be, have you ever been a renter? If so, have you ever experienced an eviction? And my last question would be, based on your experience or knowledge, what are some of the issues renters face versus homeowners? Thank you.
I have been a renter. I was a renter for 11 years during law school. And then when I first, after law school, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. Then in Montgomery County, I was a renter. My experience was generally good. I had landlords that were very responsive. They were, small business owners. This was their, and it was good. And they were very responsive, and it was just a good relationship. So I was a renter on 3 different experiences, 3 different properties, and all of them were positive. One issue that we did have was that prices kept, once you're in, prices continue to rise, and unless you want to move out, and they were rising above inflation, it becomes housing becomes less affordable over time. So that was an issue in one area, but we worked it out with the landlord, and I've had good experiences.
Well, lucky you didn't have to stay long enough to get priced out. Thank you for that, Sophia. Chris Perry, our next question for Mr. Barron. Chris, you have to unmute.
Sorry. My name is Chris Perry. I am the vice chair of the Renters Alliance board. I'm a senior citizen and a retiree from the IT industry. I fought in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, and I am a community activist, I suppose you could call me. I have a question for you. The Renters Alliance, along with our state partners, it's called Renters United Maryland. It's a coalition of statewide partners we co-founded that works to advance renter protection legislation in Annapolis. It has been struggling year in and year out to pass what we call just cause eviction protection for renters that would require a landlord to provide a stated justifiable reason to evict any tenant, including denial of a lease renewal. Are you familiar with this legislation? And what are your views on it? And would you sign it if you were elected governor?
So, Chris, I appreciate the question. I would want to look more closely at that particular legislation. The general principles are that the lens through which I would view it are, is there a due process here? Is there a problem with current due process? Is this, would the just clause principle, would it advance due process? And the second piece is predictability. You want people to know what you want renters to know what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I would want to look at that, and I will look at that further before, because the devil is in the details.
Okay.
Just so
Thank you.
our public knows, right now, a landlord in Maryland with 60 days notice can let a tenant know that their lease is not going to be renewed. The landlord does not have to provide a stated reason for not renewing that lease. And there is no defense to that in court except being able to prove retaliation, which is nearly impossible if you do not know the reason why your lease is not being renewed. And the landlord does not have to state why. And so in court, the judge only asks if you receive proper notice. No matter how long you've been in the building, no matter how good of a tenant you've been, without that protection, a landlord has the ability year in and year out, and on month-to-month leases every month, to threaten not to renew a lease and evict a individual or family for tenant holding over. All right, going back to something that Mr. Barron referenced earlier, my question is, many organizations support what is called, quote, affordable housing, urging public investment and tax breaks in building apartments. But they oppose legislation that would stabilize rents for current residents. How do you define, Mr. Barron, what affordable housing policy is? Would you support a rent stabilization program statewide? What policies would you implement to preserve housing affordability for renters while increasing housing options for working families and others? You've got a wide open question there, but take full advantage.
I appreciate that. Here's what I would do. Here are some of my main proposals in the area of affordable housing. Before I outline, and I'm going to talk specifically about rent stabilization, your question as well. Before I do that, I just want to say that as far as a fundamental value, I think this is affordable housing is an extremely important issue. People have a right to stable, affordable housing. It is a fundamental, it's a basic right that is needed for so much else, for children to grow up in a healthy, stable environment, for healthy family functioning. It is something that would be an issue that would be a top priority for me as governor. The proposals that I will advance and that I will implement as governor are ones that are based on evidence that they actually work to improve affordability and reduce homelessness, for instance. So let me describe what I would some of my main proposals in this area. Number one, we need to expand housing vouchers for families that are in unstable housing, the most unstable housing, unstable housing situations. It has been currently only fewer than a quarter of families who are eligible for federal housing vouchers actually receive those vouchers. The federal program is not fully funded. And one of my highest priorities as governor would be to expand vouchers for families in the most unstable housing, the highest need families. The value of doing that, it has been shown in a large federal study to reduce rates of homelessness, family homelessness, by about 50% over an extended period of time, over at least a 3-year period. So it has a very important impact on something that's extremely important, the rate of homelessness. But more than that, it really doesn't cost that much, because even though the vouchers are fairly expensive to the government, the federal study showed that you actually reduce the cost of emergency shelter and other emergency services, so that the net cost to the government is about $1,500 per family per year. So you can achieve this. It's possible for the government to achieve this large reduction in family homelessness at relatively modest cost. So it's kind of a no-brainer. This is an area which we should prioritize: housing vouchers for the most at-risk families. In general, going back to the question of rent stabilization, I support vouchers, demand-side assistance, helping families with assistance to pay their rent rather than rent stabilization, meaning a cap or rent control, because that can have unfortunate adverse effects. But you can achieve many of the same benefits by providing sort of demand side assistance to families and to individuals who really need it. The other piece, I have other proposals, but let me mention, just in the interest of not filibustering, let me mention one other that is very important and immediate, which is Maryland has not been doing well at all in getting dispersed the hundreds of millions of dollars that it received in emergency rental assistance. Only 26% of the money has been dispersed to renters. We have over 100,000 families, households in Maryland that are in arrears right now. So there's an emergency situation. We've only gotten a small portion of the money out. We are not doing nearly as well. We've only gotten 26% of the money out. Virginia's gotten 56% of theirs out. New Jersey's gotten 51%. This is a question of basic operational functioning of government.
Right.
Can you get the money out the door to people in need during an emergency? Maryland has not done well, both in rental assistance and unemployment assistance. That's an area where I would do much better. I'm going to stop there because I stop my answer
please
there.
don't.
Because,
please don't. I'm going to follow up and ask you, what would
Okay.
you do to speed things up?
well, when I'm governor, this is just a question of, can you get the trains run on time? Can you get government to function as it ought to function and get the money out the door to people who need it? The key thing is to appoint people to the heads of these initiatives, these programs, that have a track record of being able to make government function in the way that it should. So, for example, when the Obamacare website was first launched, you may recall this back in 2013, it had all sorts of problems. It was not functional. This was, they brought in Jeff Zients, who really did have a track record, and within a few months, they got the problem straightened out. It was functional. When I was in government, I actually was one of these people who knew how to make government function. I headed a major technology program at the Defense Department. We funded about 1,000 small technology companies a year to develop new technologies. There were a lot of moving parts to this program, a lot of operational detail. I won awards from the vice president for reducing the turnaround time in this program and implementing other reforms. You need people at the helm of these programs, and as governor, I would appoint them that know how to make government function. Those are the kinds of people I would bring into government. People who have a track record of doing it, not just who can talk a good game and are glib and all. You need people who have a track record of being able to do it. They should be heading the unemployment and the renters assistance.
Here, here.
All right.
Wow.
You're more than welcome to filibuster all you want. Your opponent is not here, and therefore you get his time. Chris Perry, would you ask the next question?
I sure will. John, that what you just said strikes a very, very sensitive nerve. One that we've, this business of making government work is something that we've watched it not work for weeks and months now. I have another question for you. Maryland it's among the lowest in the nation to increase, well, the lowest in the nation for serial eviction. Brian Frosch, our current Maryland Attorney General, is urging the legislature to increase eviction filing fees from $15 an eviction to $120, on par with most states with large renter communities. Now, the effort is intended to end serial eviction filing for those landlords who routinely use the courts as debt collectors, as they do here in Maryland, while funding such programs as a right to counsel for low-income tenants needing a lawyer when they face eviction. The legislation would prohibit or forbid the increased costs to be passed on to tenants. What are your views on this?
So on the question of right to counsel, let me make sure I understand the question before I start answering. So the question is raising the eviction filing fees has been proposed. And what is the, I sort of missed the tie-in that you were describing to the right to counsel. Could you describe that?
Yeah.
Chris, if you want me, I'll jump in. The Attorney General Brian Frosch proposed this last year. It got very close to the finish line. As I say, as Chris mentioned, that we have one of the lowest filing fees in the nation at $15, which causes most landlords to file repeatedly on the, almost on the 2nd of the month, some in about the 10th of the month or 11th of the month. But routinely, even though tenants usually pay before they get to court, but they use the court as a cudgel and as a kind of a debt collector. By raising the fee to $120, as was originally proposed, the funds that would be, and by the way, it was not just for eviction filings, it would be for all civil filings. Those funds would go to the lawyers group that collects those funds. I forgot the name of them. And Legal Services Fund, I think it's called. And they distribute to groups like Legal Aid and Public Justice and others that would fund the Right to Counsel program, as well as eviction diversion programming in the courts and other renter protection programs. That's what the funds would be designated for.
Okay, all right, thank you for the question and for the elaboration. I do support, let me talk about the right to counsel first and then talk about how it can be paid for and get to the question of the eviction filing fees. I do support the right to counsel for tenants. And I believe that money from the American Rescue Plan should be used for that purpose to help them pay for right to counsel. I think that just evens the playing field and is a necessary check against abusive practices. It makes it a balanced, the landlords have almost always have counsel. The renters often do not. This is a matter of fundamental fairness and should be addressed. So I support that. I support the right to counsel, and I support using funds from the American Rescue Plan to do that. I would want to look at the, I think I agree that more needs to be done in terms of to prevent abusive practices by landlords and, this sort of serial evictions. I would want to look a little bit more closely. I'm receptive to the idea that the Attorney General proposed. I would want to look at it more closely. The idea of raising the eviction filing fees. It seems reasonable, but again, I would just want to look at the details. But in terms of the money, that's separate from the issue. Whether it raises the money to pay for, there are other ways we should pay. I do agree on right to counsel and paying for it as well.
Just so you know that it did get out of both committees in the House and in the Senate, but did not get it across the finish line, as I believe 18 of 20 renter protection bills did not make it over the finish line in the last session of the General Assembly, but many of them will be reintroduced this time around. Before we get to a final question from the board, I want to remind people who are listening, if you have a question or a concern that has to do with affordable housing, renter housing policy, renters' rights, or the eviction crisis, please put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it and allow Mr. Barron to respond, and then of course to provide some final remarks. So one other question we have for you, Mr. Barron. Would you support funding for eviction diversion in particular, or some kind of funding program that would be operated through the Department of Housing and Community Development that not only supports programs that protect renters against abuse, tries to mediate and avoid evictions, but also provides funds to nonprofits like the Renters Alliance, which we, by the way, are the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy. A nonprofit, we're over a dozen years old now, but a voice, an organized voice for renters that is kind of a new regional phenomenon and a new national phenomenon as housing has become an increasing public policy issue and crisis for many people. So would you also support funding through the state to provide renter outreach and education about their rights and responsibilities, how to engage with local and statewide resources to get what they're entitled to protect them against abuse, and to empower communities to manage their housing in a more stable and quality fashion than what many are facing today?
So I do support, I mean, in principle, I do support outreach and education and anything that can sort of inform renters of their rights and provide assistance as well. I do think there is a need, an important need, to level the playing field between the landlords, who are often very well funded, well represented, and tenants who often are not. So anything along those lines that advances fairness, I support. Now, Matt, there are a couple other proposals. I'd like to describe them very briefly. That
you've got time.
Top priority proposals. I mentioned expanding housing vouchers, especially for the most at-risk families. There's strong evidence it reduces family homelessness by about half, and it can be done very cost effectively. That's number one. Number two, I would want to seriously explore modest zoning reform statewide, similar to what California and Oregon have done. The idea that even within single family zoned neighborhoods, to allow homeowners in those neighborhoods to construct duplexes or accessory units like granny flats. This is modest zoning reform, but there are estimates in California and Oregon, and also some cities that have tried it, Minneapolis, that if that were done on a large scale basis, as is being launched in those areas, that it would substantially increase the supply. I mean, it would be one of the most important things that could be done to increase the supply of affordable housing and to increase and to be able to do it in a way that really wouldn't change the character of those neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods, in a major way. I would want to look very closely at California and Oregon. Those are new laws as they're rolled out, but I think that is something, an important step that we should consider very seriously to increase the supply of affordable housing. So I've talked about the demand side, the vouchers. This is something important that could be done on the supply side. Finally, for in the area of homelessness, there is a program that my philanthropic team funded to expand it, that has strong evidence that it produces a sizable reduction in homelessness for people with severe mental illness, who comprise about 20% of the homeless population. It's called critical time intervention. It's for people who are homeless people who have severe mental illness like schizophrenia, who are leaving shelters or mental hospitals. It connects them with a case manager who helps to organize their environment, meaning their family support system, social service support system, to ensure that they have family and other supports to stabilize them when they're being released from shelters, when they're leaving shelters or mental hospitals. It's been shown to reduce the rate of homelessness by about 40% over an 18-month period. And by preventing rehospitalizations and additional shelter use, it more than pays for itself. So it's something that there's strong evidence that it can significantly reduce homelessness for people with severe mental illness. My philanthropic team funded to expand that to this proven approach called critical time intervention in Chicago and in Mississippi. And it's something we should be doing here in Maryland because it's been shown to be very, very effective. So those are some of my main proposals in this area.
Thank you for that. I'm not going to go in order of the questions that have come in because one relates to the homelessness issue that you're raising. And people should distinguish a couple things. One is that certainly in Montgomery County, I think we're talking about 1,100 people in the homeless community, but there are about 360,000 or more renters in Montgomery County. About 15,000 of them are in rent arrears month to month because of the pandemic and economic reasons. And of course, you can extrapolate that statewide, as you mentioned before, Mr. Barron, about over 100,000 Marylanders in rent arrears. And ultimately, I suppose, for different reasons than the homeless community you may be referring to, who are, both of us having been schooled in New Haven, I was the supervisor of the New Haven homeless shelter for some time, and we know that that population has unique characteristics to it that are often really different from the majority of renters who are facing at least housing destabilization, if not homelessness. So the question that came in more specific is Governor Hogan rescinded the eviction protection order in mid-August. As governor, what would you do for the eviction crisis? Would you reinstate the eviction protection order?
My response as governor would be to, there is money available, a lot of money available through the American Rescue Plan for renters, for rental assistance and assistance to landlords. My number one priority would be to use that money we should have stood up a program, and when I'm governor, this would be a very top priority, stand up a program that gets the money out the door to people who need it. That other states have done it. Maryland is well below the national average on this. That would be my top priority.
Sophia, you had a question for Mr. Barron?
Yes, I do have one more question for you. Okay, so this is, you may not know the answer, but it's probably a topic to think about. So like, for example, legal immigrants and people with disability definitely encounter unique issue than the regular renters. So what is your plan for the specific individuals? Like, for example, for legal immigrants, language could be an issue. Understanding the lease contract could be an issue, because definitely most contracts are in English, right? So, you know, there are some unique challenge that they are facing and they will be facing. So
yes,
this is something to think about.
Well, you know, on the back end, ensuring that they are represented by counsel, I think, is essential. That's when problems arise. But I think, you know, as I think Matt was alluding to before, maybe some of the assistance from nonprofits and others that could be funded by the state should be devoted toward, you know, providing that kind of assistance, so people understand, you know, fully understand the terms of contracts and rental agreements and so on. There could be requirements for, bilingual leases, in Spanish and so on. But yeah, I think I would support assistance for those populations.
This question comes in from Sharon, who is asking, she's been on as you know, I'm sure, Mr. Barron, that the housing voucher program only serves a fraction of those who are applying for it.
Right.
The statistic from out of my ear is I believe we have 16,000 vouchers in Montgomery County, and I think somewhere around 40 or 50,000 on a waiting list. That may be a bit larger than reality, but the point is that only a fraction are actually on a waiting list, and also are actually receiving vouchers, and a vast majority are still on a waiting list. There's also a prioritization issue with vouchers. That is, it's not a matter of first come, first serve. They would like to say that they prioritize people based on need, but it's in our experience with at least the local Housing Opportunities Commission is that it's kind of a rolling, incomprehensible approach to assigning these vouchers, and it confuses those of us with graduate degrees, let alone people who are just struggling to make ends meet. Is there anything as governor that you would do to expand and improve the voucher system, which, as we know, is federally funded, but affects everyone in our state who needs it?
Yes, well, those numbers you cited, those were from Montgomery County, I believe. Is that right? Pretty much mirror the national situation, where fewer than a quarter of households that qualify for federal housing vouchers actually receive those vouchers. And there are many more that are on a waiting list. I believe the state should supplement the federal funding for those families that are in the most unstable housing situations, because for that population, as I described before, you can have a very large effect. You can reduce homelessness by their rate of homelessness by about half, which is a very important improvement and a fundamental. I mean, these are families. Most of them are families. This is something that's an important improvement in people's lives, children's lives. It's something that's fundamental, and it can be done without great net expense to the government, because the study the Family Option Study, which was a large federal evaluation, found that the cost of the vouchers for this population, these most at-risk families, was largely offset by the fact that you would get savings from reduced use of emergency shelter and food services and so on. This is something, getting back to the fundamental theme of my campaign, which is let's do what works. Programs have been tested and proven. This is one of them. So the short answer is I would supplement, as governor, I would supplement the federal housing voucher program for the most at-risk families.
Joe asks how you develop affordable housing policies, in particular, as we have in Montgomery County. Housing developers are, in order to get tax breaks or public investment, are usually asked to set aside 12.5% to 15% of their apartments at an affordable rate, or a low area median income rate. What is your view on creating new housing that also includes affordable housing? I'm assuming I'm going to define that as housing for working class families and low income families.
So I support those kinds of policies and requirements. As currently implemented, it does often result in sometimes the quote affordable housing that is developed ends up not being so affordable, and the price can rise over time. There are also legal hassles that can result in long delays in the building of the affordable housing. So I think we need to look at ways to make those kinds of requirements more streamlined and effective. On the supply side, I also think, as I mentioned earlier, we should look at something that could be a larger solution or part of a solution is sort of common sense, modest zoning reforms that wouldn't just affect new developments and all of that, but it would allow families and homeowners in single family zoned areas to build, say, a duplex or granny flat on their property. That would open up a lot, just in terms of the magnitude of the housing supply problem. That might be a bigger solution, but I support both. I think we should do all of the above.
Rebecca asked, she says she came from Massachusetts about a year ago. Then judges were empowered to delay implementation of eviction up to 6 months, to her recollection, upon consideration of mitigating circumstances such as children in the midst of school, illnesses, and so on. The renter could not be in arrears and/or rent could be paid into the court. I imagine a kind of an escrow situation. Should the law be fixed to empower the judge to delay eviction for good cause in light of recognition of that we have a housing emergency? So she's asking for some flexibility in the court. Would you support enactment of laws that include eviction diversion, eviction delays in order for people to catch up with things like waiting for their rent relief to actually be processed so that they get a check, or some other emergency circumstances that I imagine if the landlord were acting in good faith and he or she or the company is in desperate need of getting those funds, that the state might have to step forward to bridge the gap. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd want to look at the details, but in general, I would be receptive. I mean, those seem like common sense reforms that respond to, emergency needs or, situations where if it's a family with small children and so giving judges that kind of flexibility seems like, it seems like something that is warranted. So in general, I'm receptive to those kinds of reforms.
And I believe our last question, unless somebody else puts one in the chat, comes from Lisa. Says, I'm a homeowner of a small house in Dalton, Silver Spring, who is legally blind and physically handicapped, interested in aging in place. For me and others in my neighborhood, bunched up in multi-generational families, it means adding apartments or accessory dwelling units to our homes. We do have some zoning changes to let us do so, but do not have the income or guidance needed to make these changes. I think facilitating this process could substantially increase affordable housing in residential neighborhoods without decimating green space and community cohesion. What are your thoughts to make this process easier? Not sure that was entirely clear, but I think you get the gist.
Yes. Well, part of it is the legal changes to zoning laws, again, modest legal changes that can allow this kind of, desirable, people want to age in place, they want to stay in their homes, that can allow an accessory unit to be built. Again, this can be done without changing the character of single family neighborhoods, but number one would be a legal change. And I want to explore this, similar to what California and Oregon and Minneapolis have done, a legal change to allow those kinds of, accessory units to be built at all. The second piece would be outreach and assistance to facilitate the process, to help people understand what the process is, and how to take advantage of it. When if there is a change in the law to allow this to happen, there needs to be an education and outreach process from the government or from nonprofits, so that people can take advantage of these important opportunities.
Okay, seeing no other questions in the chat, I'm going to ask Mr. Barron the most dangerous question anyone can ever be asked when on radio, television, or in a media interview. In my background being a press secretary, we would prep principals and candidates to answer the tough questions. And if you neglect to prep them on this question, we were in trouble. So this question is, Mr. Barron, do you have anything else to add?
Here is one thing that I thank you for that tough follow-up question. So one thing I do want to add is this. I think you've heard from most of the other candidates your group has. First, I want to say that I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. And I'd like to do this again at some point as the campaign goes forward. And once I'm elected governor, I will reach out to the renter community. I would like to maintain that and seek input. One of the challenges, I've outlined a number of initiatives here: potentially modest zoning reform, expansion of vouchers for the most at-risk, housing vouchers for the most at-risk families, critical time intervention, that's for people with severe mental illness to prevent homelessness, getting the money out the door on rental assistance. That really has to be like #1 priority as soon as there's a new administration, or even before. I would hope Governor Hogan takes this on and makes this a top priority and appoints the right people. So all of those things are extremely important. But I would reach out and be a partner when these are implemented and launched and developed, launched, implemented. It's important to know how they are working in operation. We need input, not just at the policy level and so on. We need to find out what's actually happening with renters, also with landlords, and so on. We need input from, and I would proactively seek that out in all of these policies. That's one thing I want to add. The last thing I would add, the way I differ from the other candidates, we all share many similar goals, which is we want to improve education, we want to improve housing affordability, we want to improve healthcare in our state. Here's where I'm different. I recognize that to achieve those goals, it's not enough to simply roll out yet another unproven plan or program. Because however well-intentioned, many programs just don't work, as we've seen too often when the results are actually measured. There's certain kinds of homelessness prevention program. We didn't discuss the programs that are very well-intentioned, but just actually did not reduce the rate of homelessness. So if we are actually going to make progress in affordable housing and the other areas, education and healthcare and poverty and reversing stagnant wages, we have to focus on solutions that have been tested in the real world and shown to make a big difference, like the ones that I've described here today. If it's just, one unproven plan after the next, we're going to be here in another 20 years and we'll still have a problem with affordable housing and the poverty rate's going to be the same. And we don't want that. To make progress, we have to focus on what's tested and proven. That's how I'm different.
Very good. They say it's a sneaky question. Many times when we're dealing with a difficult subject on live radio, we've prepped on everything, and then somebody say, well, we've got an extra couple of minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add? And it's a free commercial and the airtime goes blank. Terrible business. Glad you were able to answer that effectively, Mr. Barron. Let me just say, I want to thank my colleagues, Vice Chair of our board, Chris Perry, our board member, Sophia Bouchen, very active on the Silver Spring Citizens Advisory Board and with the Ethiopian community, and much more than that. And also, I want to thank all of our participants here tonight with an admonishment that comes from the chair of our board, who could not be here tonight, who works for the Center for American Progress and is very active in strengthening our democracy. He has asked me, William Roberts has asked me to urge everyone to please vote. The Renters Alliance does not support any party or candidate, no matter how much we like them, but that is not our business. We are a 501c3, but we do support and urge everyone to please register and vote. Nothing is more important as a citizen in our democracy than to participate. So I want to thank Mr. John Barron for his participation this evening. It is very important to our renter community to know the views of the candidates who are running for the most important offices in our state. And so we really thank you for giving us your time and your thoughts. We will especially welcome the opportunity, if you are fortunate enough to win the election, to meet with you as governor. We have not had that opportunity to do that with our statewide coalition, Renters United Maryland or the Renters Alliance, in any kind of memory that I have, and I've been doing this for 12 years. So we would certainly welcome that opportunity with you and any candidate who wins the office of governor. So between now and then, folks, we have a primary in June, and those of you who can vote for your party candidate should do so. And then the general election is a year from this month. So we look forward to your participation in that. With that, Mr. Barron, thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.